Arizona Territory, 1874. The sun was barely up when they dragged Zadie Whitlow through the dirt street of Dry Creek, wrists bound, dress torn, mouth set hard. Stole a loaf from the mercantile, the deputy barked, jerking her forward. Said it was for her boy. Zadie kept her eyes on the ground, but she did not deny it. She had not eaten in 2 days. Her son, Barrett, only 4, was sick with fever and had not stood on his feet since last week. She had begged the storekeeper for credit, but he shut the door in her face. So she took the bread and ran. They threw her into the holding cell behind the sheriff's office, a dark, sweltering box of iron bars and wood rot. She could barely see her hands in the gloom. The sheriff told her she would be held until the judge rode through next month. Barrett, too weak to walk, had been left with old Marnie, the laundress who lived 3 doors down from their shack. Zadie sat on the wooden bench, arms folded tight over her stomach. She was 23, widowed, and had nothing left to lose. But someone was watching. Quinlan Cooper leaned against the rail post outside the sheriff's office, arms crossed, hat low over his eyes. He had seen the whole thing. He knew Zadie. Not well, but enough. She worked laundry and sometimes cleaned dishes at the saloon where he played cards. She never spoke unless spoken to. She kept her hair pinned tight and her chin high. She had the kind of face that made a man stop walking, but she never used it to her advantage. He had seen her boy too. Small thing with a cough like dry leaves. Ran after her skirts like a shadow. Quinlan pushed off the post and walked in. "Sheriff," he said, voice low and steady. Sheriff Danner looked up from his desk. "What is it, Cooper?" "I want her out." Danner snorted. "She's in for theft. I will pay for the bread. And I will pay her fine." The sheriff squinted at him. "You sweet on her?" "No, sir," Quinlan said. "But I do not sit easy knowing a woman is locked up for feeding her child." The sheriff scratched his beard, then nodded. $2 for the bread. 5 for the fine. Quinlan handed over the coins without blinking. "Open the door." The sheriff did. The key turned with a heavy click. Zadie looked up as the light poured in. Her eyes were wary, sharp. "You are free," the sheriff muttered, annoyed. Quinlan stepped forward. "Come on, Miss Whitlow." She stood slowly, spine stiff, as not leaving his face. "Why?" "Because no one should be jailed for doing what you did." She followed him out in silence. He walked her down the street. "Your boy's with Marnie." "I checked." Zadie nodded. "Thank you." Quinlan glanced at her. "You do not have to say anything. Just get home to him." They reached her little shack near the edge of town. Zadie opened the door. Barrett lay on a cot, cheeks flushed, eyes closed. She rushed to him, touched his forehead, then looked back at Quinlan. "I owe you." "No, you do not." She hesitated. "I mean it. You do not even know me." Quinlan looked around the sparse room, 1 cot, 1 chair, cracked floor, a bucket of stale water. "You need help." She blinked, wary again. "What kind of help?" He met her eyes. "I have a cabin. It is out past the ridge, about a half-day's ride. I got land, a well, chickens, and space. You and your boy come stay. Just until he is better." Her mouth parted slightly. "You want me to live with you?" "No. I want you to survive. That is all." Zadie looked down at her son, then back at the man beside her. He was tall, quiet, maybe 28, with a strong jaw and hands rough from work. He was not offering charity. He was offering a chance. That night, she packed their few things. A cracked comb, 1 extra dress, a worn toy horse for Barrett. At dawn, she wrapped her boy in a blanket and met Quinlan behind the livery. He had 2 horses saddled and a small wagon hitched. "I will drive," he said. "You ride with him." Zadie climbed into the wagon, holding Barrett close. Quinlan took the reins and they left Dry Creek behind. The ride was long, quiet. The landscape opened around the mesquite trees. Red dust. The sun climbing hot and high. Quinlan glanced back once. Zadie was watching him, her face unreadable. By late afternoon, they reached his land. The cabin was small but sturdy, with a porch that faced west and a windmill spinning slow beside the well. Chickens pecked near the barn. A dog barked and ran toward them, tail wagging. Zadie's eyes filled. She blinked fast and looked away. Inside, the cabin was cool and clean. 2 rooms, a bed in each, a kitchen with a wood stove. Quinlan set down a pail of water and handed her a cloth. She washed Barrett's face and laid him in the bed. He stirred, opening his eyes. "Mama," he whispered. "I am here, baby." Quinlan stepped back, giving them space. That night, she cooked beans and cornbread. Barrett ate a little. Then he slept. Zadie sat on the porch as the sun sank. Quinlan joined her. They did not speak for a while. "Finally," she said, "no one has ever done what you did. You needed help. That is not all you gave me." He looked over. "What else?" Zadie turned to him, her eyes soft. "A chance to breathe." He looked down at his hands. "You can stay as long as you need." She nodded. "I will earn it. Can cook, clean, so I am not afraid of work." "I know." They sat in silence again. But something had shifted. Inside, Barrett slept sound. A breeze stirred the night air, and for the first time in months, Zadie felt safe. Zadie woke to birdsong and the creak of the cabin's front door easing shut. The bed beside hers was warm with the weight of her son, his breathing easier now, though his forehead still held a trace of heat. She eased herself from beneath the quilt and stepped to the window. Quinlan was walking toward the barn, carrying a bucket in each hand. The dog, a rangy thing with a torn ear, loped behind him. She watched for a moment, then turned back to her boy. He stirred but didn't wake. She left a folded cloth dampened with cool water across his brow and stepped outside. The morning air was dry and already warming. She crossed the yard, skirts brushing against clover and hard-packed earth. Quinlan had just set the buckets down when he noticed her. "You sleep any?" he asked, brushing dust from his sleeve. "A little," she said. "He's better, but not well." He nodded. "I'll take the wagon into town tomorrow. There's a woman there who makes a tonic for fever. Costs near $1, but folks swear by it." Zadie narrowed her eyes at him. "I don't want you spending more on us." "I didn't ask if I could," he said, not unkindly. She crossed her arms. "You always do what you want, then?" He looked at her steadily. "Only when it matters." Zadie shifted her weight, uncertain how to answer that. "I can take care of my own debts." "I believe that." She glanced toward the coop. "You mind if I gather eggs? You know how to handle hens?" She shot him a look, one brow raised. "I was raised with 6 younger siblings and a coop twice the size." "Help yourself, then." She moved past him, skirt swishing, and he watched her go. She didn't walk like a woman beaten down, not anymore. She moved like someone remembering her own spine. Inside the coop, she worked quiet and quick, collecting 5 warm eggs and brushing straw from her palms. When she stepped back into the yard, Quinlan had pulled a saddle onto one of the horses. "You ride?" he asked, adjusting the cinch. "Not since my wedding day," she said. "But I remember enough not to fall." He didn't smile, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. "We'll go slow." She frowned. "Where?" "Creek's a 1/4 mile east. Cattle need water. Thought you might like to see the rest of the land." She hesitated. "I can't leave him alone. I already asked Marnie to ride out. She'll be here by sun high." Zadie blinked. "You asked her yesterday?" "I figured you'd need a break," he said, offering a hand to help her mount. She looked at it for a moment, then took it. His hand was dry and calloused, steady as stone. The ride was quiet. The horse beneath her stepped gentle, and Quinlan kept pace beside her, one hand on the reins, the other resting easy on the saddle horn. They passed mesquite and barrel cactus, their shadows sharp in the rising light. The land rolled gently, golden and sparse, dotted with scrub and the occasional hawk cry overhead. At the bend of the creek, water curled slow around smooth stones. He dismounted and helped her down. She knelt by the bank and dipped her fingers in. "Cooler than I expected," she said. "Spring-fed," he answered. She sat back on her heels. "This all yours?" He nodded. 80 acres. Got it for near nothing after the war. Most folks didn't want to settle this far out. "Why did you?" Quinlan tossed a pebble into the water. "Didn't want to be looked at." She tilted her head, curious now. Why would anyone look at you? He took a while before answering. Because I came back different. And because I didn't come back with anyone. Zadie didn't speak. The wind moved through the grass around them. He sat beside her, one knee drawn up. I had a younger brother. He followed me into the cavalry. Died in Kansas. He was 17. Her throat tightened. I'm sorry. He nodded, not looking at her. After that, I didn't want to be near people who remembered the boy I used to be. Zadie looked at the water. I lost a husband. Name was Eli. Pneumonia took him before Barrett's 2nd birthday. I figured you had no one left, he said softly. She turned to him. I didn't. Not until yesterday. He didn't answer, but his jaw shifted slightly. They sat there a long while, not touching, not speaking. Just letting the quiet settle between them. When they rode back, Marnie was already at the cabin, rocking slowly on the porch with Barrett curled against her chest. Zadie thanked her with a nod, then carried her boy inside. That night, she lit a candle and sat at the table while Quinlan carved a piece of pine. She watched his hands, the way the knife moved sure and slow. What are you making? She asked. He didn't look up. Figure of a horse. For the boy. Zadie felt her chest tighten. He'll like that. I thought he might. She stood and crossed to the door, looking out at the stars. You're not like the men in town. No, he said, voice low. I'm not. She turned to look at him. He didn't move, just kept carving. And for the first time in years, something inside her began to uncoil. Not all at once, but enough to breathe deeper than she had in a long time. The days settled into something like rhythm. Barrett's fever broke the morning after the creek ride. Zadie found him sitting upright, eyes clearer, appetite stronger. She spooned him broth made from chicken Quinlan had slaughtered himself and watched color return to his cheeks. He asked where they were, and when she told him they'd come to a good place, he nodded solemnly and leaned against her shoulder. By the end of the week, he was following Quinlan around the yard, dragging a stick through the dirt and asking too many questions. Quinlan answered what he could, patient and unhurried. Zadie watched them from the porch as she mended a ripped hem. Her hands moved automatically, but her eyes stayed on them, her son, her quiet host. There was something steady in the way Quinlan moved through the world. He didn't fill silences just to ease them. He didn't reach for praise or push to be seen. He just did what needed doing, and it made her chest ache in a way she couldn't name. One afternoon, while Barrett napped, Zadie stepped into the barn where Quinlan was oiling the hinges on the tack chest. You always work like the place might fall apart if you stop, she asked, her voice lighter than she meant it to be. He looked up, wiping his hands on a rag. Some things don't hold if you don't tend them. Guess I understand that, she said, running her fingers along the edge of the stall. You ever think about building more? Another room, maybe. Thought about it, he said. But I've never had enough reason to. She met his eyes then. Neither of them looked away. He stood, set the rag down, and leaned against the stall door. You want to stay? She didn't answer right away. I didn't come here planning to, but I think about it now. He nodded once. You wouldn't owe me anything. I know, she said. That's part of why it matters. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate, stopping just close enough that she could see the scar running along the side of his throat. She hadn't noticed it before. Not from that angle. You're not afraid of quiet, are you? He asked. No, she said. I'm afraid of pretending. I don't pretend. I know. He looked at her for a long moment. I built this place so I wouldn't have to answer to anyone. And now, I wouldn't mind someone asking. Neither of them moved. She reached up then, slowly, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Barrett's strong, she said. He'll grow up into a man who remembers kindness. Who learns to return it. Quinlan's voice was low. He already is. I see it in how he looks at you. Her breath caught. And you? What do you see when you look at me? He didn't hesitate. Someone who got knocked down and stood back up before the dust even settled. Her throat tightened. That isn't how I felt. Doesn't matter. It's how you are. The sun had dipped low by the time they stepped out of the barn. Barrett was awake, sitting on the porch steps, the carved horse clutched in one hand. That night, after supper, Zadie washed the dishes while Quinlan cleared the table. Barrett sat cross-legged by the hearth, whispering stories to his wooden steed. Quinlan spoke without turning. I've got some lumber stacked behind the shed. She dried her hands and leaned against the counter. For what? He looked up. Thought I'd start building. A room of your own. If you're staying. Zadie crossed the space between them, slow, certain. I won't stay in a separate room forever, she said. He met her gaze, eyes steady. I wasn't planning for forever yet. She smiled then, the first real one in months. Well, maybe you should. Outside, the wind picked up, warm and dry. Inside, the fire crackled low. Barrett climbed into bed without protest. Zadie tucked the quilt around him, kissed his brow, and turned back toward the small kitchen where Quinlan stood waiting. They didn't speak again that night, but when he reached for her hand, she let him. And when she didn't pull away, he didn't let go. The hammering started at dawn. Zadie opened her eyes to the tap-tap rhythm of nails meeting wood, steady and unhurried, like a heartbeat she hadn't known she missed. She rose quietly, careful not to wake Barrett, who now slept through the night, his breathing deep and even. She wrapped her shawl over her shoulders and stepped outside barefoot, the morning air still cool, the porch boards rough beneath her feet. Quinlan stood behind the cabin, sleeves rolled, sawdust clinging to his forearms. He was finishing the frame of a small addition against the north wall, the lumber hauled from town 2 days prior. She didn't speak, didn't want to break the clean focus in his face. The way he measured with his hands, lifted the beam, fitted it into place like he'd built 100 homes before this one. He noticed her after a moment, pausing only long enough to nod toward a crate near the edge of the garden. There's coffee. Should still be warm. She poured herself a tin cup and sat on the crate, watching him work. The sun hadn't quite cleared the ridge, and the light turned the edge of everything gold. Bees stirred in the wildflowers by the fence. The hen nearest her scratched at the dirt, puffing her feathers. You always build with your hands alone? She asked, voice soft. Quinlan set the hammer down and stretched his neck. Never had an extra pair that wanted to stay long. You could have hired someone from town. He wiped his brow with the back of his arm. Didn't want this done by someone who didn't know why it mattered. Zadie took another sip, the heat of it settling low in her chest. You make it hard to keep distance. Do you still want distance? She didn't answer. Instead, she stood and walked to the edge of the frame, running her fingers along the grain of one upright beam. You've never asked me what I want. Quinlan leaned against the ladder, arms crossed. Didn't figure I had the right. I'm here, she said, meeting his gaze. You gave me something when I had nothing. Not just shelter. You looked at me like I wasn't broken. You weren't. I still ain't sure I know how to be wanted. He stepped closer, but not too close. You don't have to know yet. Zadie looked down at her hands. Barrett's going to remember this place. Maybe even call it home. He should, Quinlan said. If you want it to be. She nodded once. I think I do. Later that day, while Barrett helped feed the hens, mostly tossing more grain on the ground than in the trough, Zadie stood in the small room Quinlan had nearly finished. The walls were bare, just rough planks, but the window faced east and the breeze carried the scent of dry sage. She ran her hand along the sill. You planned this to face morning. Quinlan leaned in the doorway. Figured you'd like the light. I do, she said. You see things others don't. I pay attention, he said. Doesn't seem like much, but it adds up. She turned toward him. That's the thing, isn't it? You keep adding up. Quiet, steady. I look at you and think, how did I not see this before? He didn't smile, but there was warmth in the way he looked at her. You weren't ready to. They stood there, the afternoon light shifting across the floor, the sound of Barrett's voice floating in from the yard. Zadie stepped forward slowly. I don't want to keep waiting for something to go wrong. You won't have to, he said. Not here. She reached up and touched his collar, fingers brushing the fabric like she needed to be sure he was real. You still want more than just someone passing through? I want something built to last. She nodded. Then let's build it. Quinlan's hand came to rest at her waist, gentle, sure. This time, when she rose up and kissed him, it wasn't cautious. It wasn't apology or hesitation. It was the solid kind, the kind that said, I choose this. I choose you. And when Barrett called for her from the yard, she turned, smiled at Quinlan and said, "Come on, let's go see what trouble he's gotten into." Quinlan took her hand without a word, and together, they stepped into the sun. The new room smelled of pine and oil, and by the end of the week, Quinlan had built a narrow dresser and a small writing table to sit beneath the east-facing window. Zadie laid a quilt across the bed herself, one she'd sewn long ago in the months after Eli died, stitched from scraps of his shirts and the muslin she'd once used to swaddle Barrett. Back then, it had been something to keep her hands from trembling. Now it settled over the bed like a seal, a soft, quiet claim. Quinlan didn't ask for a wedding. He didn't speak of preachers or papers. But one crisp morning, he knocked once on the doorframe of the new room and cleared his throat. "I've got a ring," he said. "Don't know if it fits. Belonged to my mother." Zadie turned, stilling where she stood by the table, her hands dusted with flour. He stepped forward and set the small box on the sill. She opened it in silence. The band was thin, gold dulled by time, the stone a pale, imperfect sapphire. "I don't need one," she said softly. "I know, but I'll wear it." He nodded once, his jaw tight. "Then I reckon that settles it." She slipped it on her finger, and it fit as if it had been waiting for her all along. They married in the yard, just the three of them and the land to witness it. Barrett insisted on wearing his cleanest shirt, which had one stubborn grass stain at the elbow, and Quinlan let him carry the carved horse in his pocket. Afterward, they shared a stew made from the last of the potatoes and a bit of salt pork, and Zadie laughed when Barrett tried to feed the dog from his spoon. Quinlan leaned back in his chair, watching them both with a quiet contentment that needed no words. That night, once Barrett was tucked in and the shutters drawn, Zadie stood barefoot at the edge of the door to the room Quinlan had built. She leaned her head against the frame. "I never imagined this," she said. He looked up from the book in his lap. "What did you imagine?" "Not much beyond the next meal. The next fever." Quinlan set the book aside. "You don't have to imagine anymore. You can start planning." She stepped into the room, the floor cool beneath her feet. "I want a garden. Just a little one. Maybe some beans, squash. Something to put up for winter. I'll help you turn the ground." "I know you will," she said and crossed to him. They lay together that night without urgency, without the weight of uncertainty. There was no trembling, no flinching. Just the quiet joining of two people who had learned to trust the shape of silence, the steadiness of breath, the honesty of hands. In the weeks that followed, the land warmed. Zadie planted her garden by the fence, and Barrett helped her drop seeds into the furrows. Quinlan taught him how to tie knots, how to oil the hinges so they wouldn't groan, how to listen for the weather in the wind. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the porch in honeyed light, Zadie sat beside Quinlan with her bare feet resting on the rail. Barrett was asleep already, worn out from chasing the hens, the carved horse tucked under one arm. Zadie reached for Quinlan's hand. "Do you miss the quiet you had before?" He shook his head. "It never felt like peace. It just felt empty." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "It feels full now, doesn't it?" He pressed his lips to her hair. "It feels like home." They stayed that way until the stars came out and the land cooled around them and the night settled gentle as a blanket. Years later, folks in Dry Creek would still speak of the woman who took a loaf of bread and built a life from it. They'd shake their heads at how it started and smile at how it ended. They'd say that once she and Cooper married, you couldn't find one without the other. She ran the garden and taught the boy his letters. He kept the fence mended and carved toys on winter evenings. Barrett grew tall, and when he left to start his own life, he did so with two things in his pocket, the wooden horse and a letter from his mother written at the table beneath the east-facing window. And in the evenings, long after the chores were done and the supper dishes put away, Zadie and Quinlan sat on the porch with the stars above and the earth steady beneath their feet. They didn't need to speak much anymore. Everything worth saying had already been lived. And they were happy, fully, quietly, forever.